Hi guys, thank you for joining in. First of all, wishing you all a very happy new year. Wishing this year brings out all your joys and a very prosperous new year. I will be starting with the session, but before I start, I would like to ask if I am audible to all of you. I'll take that as a yes, and now we will start with the session. And before I start with the session, let's set some ground rules. We will try to make this session as interactive as possible. You can ask questions, and I'm reserving the last 15 minutes of the session just for the Q&A. You can keep asking questions. If I feel that these questions can be answered live on the call, I will be answering them live, and otherwise, I will be keeping them parked for the next half. With that, let's get started with the beginner to a beginner guides to Spring Boot. But before I start with Spring Boot, I would like you to understand, or I would like to divide this Spring Boot term. This Spring Boot is basically divided into two parts: Spring and Boot. How many of you have worked on the have worked with Spring in the past? Come on, guys, come on. Or how many of you know what Spring is all about? What Spring holds and what Spring is all about. Yeah. Yes, Spring is basically a framework it's basically an open source framework which was developed on top of which is a Java based framework, which is basically used for a layered architecture. It's basically a layered architecture which is majorly used for enterprise level application development. So you can say Spring is an advanced version of J2EE or Java 2 Enterprise Edition. Does that make sense till now? Now, the Spring framework in total was a very complex framework. Why? Because what Spring had, it had a lot of configurations. I will be discussing the features and how Spring works. I will be covering all that. But in that all, to make this framework work, there were some configurations which were required, which were majorly on the on the context side. Then you had to declare some beans, which was a bean declaration, and there were plenty of stuff. So a lot of developers' productivity was wasted in doing this configuration. So the engineers thought, why don't we add a bootstrapping mechanism for Spring? Which means, I'll give you a URL, you just come to a URL, you tell me what all you need, and we start and we give you the project to work on right away. Does that make sense? That is when, or that is where we coined the term Spring Boot. So what is Spring Boot? Spring Boot is basically a mechanism in which we are able to bootstrap Spring without having to worry about the logistics or without having to have a lot of boilerplate code or without a lot of technical debt. Does that make sense? Anyone having any questions till now? I'll just log in to view the question which you guys are asking. Don't worry, guys. What I'll do is I will be giving you time to create or to to take screenshots so that you can so that will help you to get started. And sorry for that noise, guys. Sorry for that noise. So what I will be doing is I will be giving you time to take screenshots so that you can capture them and keep it reserved for later. Also, towards the end, I will be so all my discussions are based on a blog on Geek4Geeks. I will be taking that blog and I will be bringing it out for your notice so that you can you can refer that in future. So now, when we are a beginner, okay, I will be clearing this. If anyone wants, you can take screenshot. Now, the next thing is, so as a beginner, what is important now? So what I've understood that Spring Boot will be nothing but a extension of Spring, which will be a self-contained or which will be faster and easier to run, right? So now what it means is, it means that in order to learn Spring Boot, I need to have clear basics of Spring, which will help me understand how the entire configurations of Spring Boot are working. Does it make sense? So you will be getting, I know there will be some questions. I am a fresher to Java. I know Java. Can I learn Spring Boot? The answer is yes, you can learn Spring Boot. But rather than learning Spring Boot, I would recommend you to come via the Spring route. Don't understand the Spring in detail, but at least understand what Spring has to offer. Why was Spring so popular when there were other frameworks like Struts and other frameworks? Why Spring gained popularity? And what is it that Spring continues to lead that thing? Correct? Does it make sense? So on that notes, on that discussion, what are the features of Spring? A very important and a very important topic. Why? Because some of your interview questions will be on this thing only. The first reason of Spring is very lightweight. Now you have to understand what is it that Spring is just one framework. Now if you want to use Spring with some data binding, or you want to use some ODM like Hibernate, you have to get that ODM and use with it. So Spring exists as a very lightweight solution, which makes it worth the effort or worth the time it is giving us. Then the most important features or most important thing which is there in Spring is the concept of context, or you can say IOC. So what happens is, now I'll take a very common example. Let's say that I have a employee object. Now in an employee object, I have multiple things. I have name, I have its ID, and I have so on and so on. Now, typically, if you are using your application or in your normal Java application, whenever you have to make the object, you would say employee E is equal to new employee. Correct? Does it make sense? But in case of Spring, Spring believes in containerization. What do you mean by that? It basically creates a container, which is we call it as application context. There are two contexts available. Now this container holds all my beans. So next question will be, what are beans, or what is a bean? A bean is nothing but a Java Pojo which you use to create objects. So now let's say my application is having an employee bean. Another bean is let's say a salary bean. So all these beans which are there, now they reside inside this container. Correct? This is my employee bean, this is my salary bean. Now I could have a master bean, which is loading all my master data. What do you mean by data? In master data in particular could mean, like, let's say a list of country, or a list of bank accounts, like a list of banks in India. Now anything which is common across all the entire application, right? So now let's say I have a master bean. So now what happens is, now let's say employee one logs into the app. At that instance, when employee one logs in, this data is taken up, right? And a new entity of or new object is created and returned. Correct? So this is controlled by a mechanism, or this is controlled by something which we call as a scope of being. Now, so now a bean could be a simple bean which will create a new object every time. Another bean could be, let me just reduce down the zoom of this one. Yeah. Another bean could be, let's say I have a database connection bean. Now I know that the connection to database is always singleton. So what I do, I say DB is a singleton bean. So all this complex management, like all those who are coming for Java interviews, it's a very important interview question. How do you make a class as singleton, right? So all that complex logic, which was to be managed by us as developers, is now outsourced to Spring, which makes our work much easier. I'll just take a pause to get the questions and then I'll move ahead. Hmm, okay. Aniket, yes, Aniket. So by default, whatever you create, everything will be, will be a bean, and it we will be managing it, by using the concepts of auto wiring. Okay, perfect, very good, guys. Now, so let's first talk around the features, then we will move ahead with the next part. So this container, which is one of the most important feature, or you can say this is the baseline for the entire Spring. Now, what I'll do, I'll show you how a typical application context looks like. Again, this is resources, and this is my Spring config. So what is the Spring config? Here I determine what all beans are there. So what I said, this is my bean. Like, let's say this is my first bean. This is my second bean. I give it, it's a type. It's a singleton bean, right? It's a prototype bean. I can determine like what type of, or what is the scope of the bean, and this is how my beans are defined. Now, as a developer, what I would do, I first have to create this configuration, and then I have to go and in my main file, I have to load my bean. How do I load the bean? I load the bean by passing that from the application context, create the object and load it from the class path. So now the resources is in the class path. From that class path, get that file, and in that file there will be a get bean with the ID hello world. There will be a bean, if you observe carefully, with the ID hello world. Get this bean and print out whatever is in the bean. Now, if I take you to the hello world bean, it will be a very simple bean which will be having a message. So now you would have got the answer. What is a bean? A bean is the smallest part, or the non-functional part which just holds a kind of a model. You can also call it to be a pojo. Now bean is having all the functions like the getter and setters, which we typically call once we are setting data onto a bean. Does it make sense, guys? Now, now the beauty of this scenario is, or this the entire use case is, when I print this bean and when I print this bean, I will get the same output for both of them. Why? Because hello world is only one bean. Whereas when it's different, or when it's prototype, in that case, I will be getting different objects. I will be showing this demo. So all this task, which was to be, which first of all, before Spring, you had to manage this. With Spring, this work became easier for us, right? And with the advent, and by going a step forward in Spring Boot, all this task is now outsourced to Spring Boot, making our work and making our things much more simpler. Does that make sense? Now, another thing which you will be observing is that I have defined a property over here. What is this property? You can take it to be the initialization of the bean. Typically we support two types of injection. So one is a constructor, which I will be showing it to you, like the dependency injection in Spring. This is that example. Now, if you observe my another example, what do you see, that I am injecting my dependency over here inside these beans dynamically. Guys, does that make sense, all of you? Now you have to understand, should I learn Spring? The answer to that will lie in, do you want to be a backend developer, or are you interested in continuing your journey in the Java backend domain? Then Spring is a very good framework or a very good tool to learn. It eases a lot of the development effort and makes application development pretty smooth. Correct, guys? Now, what are the different containers? Now, typically, Spring has a Spring core container. I will be jumping back to this to my whiteboard, guys. Now, I will be clearing this. Now, the architecture of Spring looks the architecture of Spring looks something like this. So basically, there will be a core container inside Spring. Now, what this core has beans, it has the core, it has the context. Now, on top of them, you can bind or you can have your AOP or aspect oriented programming coming up, and then you have the aspects which are binded, and these then can talk to different integrations. What are integrations? I can have a JDBC based integration. Does it make sense? And then I can go and I can use, or I can also use the Spring Web to develop web APIs. Does it make sense? This is the simplest, you can say this is the simplest Spring diagram which you will ever see. The core part is the one which you have to understand. You have to understand what is being, you have to understand what is the core, and you have to understand what is the context. And we have already discussed this. So, what is a Spring core? It's basically the that part of the Spring which provides the dependency injection and IOC. Containers provide, the context provides you the container where the beans are held, and beans are nothing but individual pojos, or individual pojos which you basically use, or whose objects you make in a day-to-day life. Guys, any questions till now on the Spring? Guys, this is not a Spring series, it's just how do you get started with the Spring Boot. It's not a series of lectures, it's just one lecture, a part of the trade which is required for you to understand, like, do you want to pursue this path or not. Correct, guys? Now, if this part makes sense, what I'll do is the example which I had taken, I will use that example, and I'll run this example for you once to understand how it looks like. Correct? Now, I know that most of you will be confused. What is application context? What is get bean? What are all these? I'm just, see, we have to move away from Spring. So, but we should know what Spring is all about. So, when I run this, so now what do you see? Hello world. Even when I create or when I get a new object of the hello world, so hello world bean and hello world bean one, these are two different objects, but they have the same object or the same code, right? Why? Because they point to the same object internally. Whereas employee, which is a prototype one, is having different IDs. And this employee, which is again, now observe the beauty of Spring. Now, these are two employees. This is an employee which is prototype, and this is an employee. The employee object or the employee bean is same, but it's singleton. So when I get the employee over here like this, I get the same IDs or the same code over here. Guys, does it make sense? All of you. If this part is good and if this part makes sense, it's good that we move on to understand how this initialization process is targeted and how we can bootstrap our project. So for bootstrapping project, Spring came up with this resource which is known as start.spring.io. I will be sending this over here. This is a link which you all can refer. Now, so what Spring did was Spring found out that it is difficult for developers to get started. Now, okay, there is one more thing. Now, when you are using Spring for the web app, so what you have to do is when you have to use Spring, You have to go to your Eclipse and install a software named as Tomcat. Most of you would have done that, right? Now, as a Spring Boot framework, which is a holder or a container for everything, what Spring Boot has done, Spring Boot has created a initializer. What's an initializer? Here you tell which package tool you have to use, what version you have to use, what should be the output of the one, what should be the project name, and these are some project specific details like the artifact ID, the group ID, the description, and so on henceforth. And next, so based on this information, a project will be downloaded onto your machine, a zip file, which you can import into any of your Eclipse or any of your ID, and you can start from there. Guys, does that make sense? Now, respecting time, let's try doing this. Correct, guys? So, what I do, I go to Spring Initializer. I say I want a Maven project. I want it to be in Java. This is the version I want. I give it to be org.geeks for geeks. I say resolution days, reso days, 2023.sample. I give it a name as beginners. Let's start Spring Boot. Correct, guys? I just format the name in a proper manner and I say, let's start Spring Boot. Now, I determine that what kind of packaging is it and what version of Java I want. Once I will click generate, it will download a zip file. But before doing that, let me add some dependencies. Now, these dependencies are very exhaustive. Okay, how many of you understand what is Maven or Gradle? Guys, how many of you understand what is Maven or Gradle? Yes or no? Guys, come on, come on. Okay. To all those who are not familiar with this, assuming that you guys are not aware, these are managed, build management tools. So all the dependencies are injected via Maven. I will be showing it to you, so don't worry. I go to dependencies and I say web. As soon as I say web, what it does, it will build a web project which will be RESTful APIs. Application can use Spring MVC and Apache Tomcat will be the default container. You can choose multiple of these, but I am going with Spring Web and I will be clicking on to generate. Now, it has got this project up and running. It is expanding the project or it's unzipping the project for me. It shouldn't take this much more time. Yeah. So you see now my project is up and over here. Now I have to go to my my Eclipse and import this. Now what you will notice till now, I am not adding the Spring to Eclipse. I don't want to complex things for you. My work is to make it easier for you to get started with Spring, right? I go over here, I close all these unwanted projects, and I come up over here. I say, I say import. Now, what I'm importing? I'm importing an existing project to Eclipse. I click on browse and I go to my downloads folder. Let's start Spring and I say open. I say finish. And once I say finish, it will get everything which it needs, the Maven, the configuration, all the dependencies, and will bootstrap the project for me. Now, the project creation, which would have taken such a large amount of time, is now done in few seconds, and that is what is the aim of Spring Boot. Guys, does that make sense, all of you? Anyone who is not able to, who is not able to follow up? Okay, sure, Karthik. I'll explain dependency injection. Don't worry. If time permits, I'll explain that. Don't worry. Now I go over here. I expand my project over here. I say, let's start Spring Boot. Now, first, I'll spend 5 minutes to explain you the project structure of. Just give me a second. Now, you will find there is a source main Java. What is this Java? This is the main holder or the main file where my Java project will run. Correct, guys? Now, the other file over here is the resources. So all your configurations will go into this application.properties, and this is available in the class path, right? Then I have some things, my Java dependencies. These are my Maven dependencies. But before moving on to that, let me explain how do I control a Maven project. So I have something like pom.xml, which I typically will be used, or which will be the starting of the Maven project. So what it says, what is Maven? It's basically a build tool which is used. The aim of this is to hold everything at one place. So now, whatever information was it, what is the model version, what is the group ID, what is the artifact ID, the version of the project, the name, the description, which version of Java will it be using, and what all dependencies will be there, and how to build this project. All this is defined in this pom.xml. Now, based on these dependencies will be downloaded from internet, from the Maven repository, and will be placed up over here into the M2 folder on the machine. Now, if the dependency is by default available or is already present, it will not re-download it. Otherwise, it will re-download, which might take some time on your laptops. Guys, does it make sense? Yeah. Okay. Now, hoping, okay, shall I give it a break for a second for all of you to come up to this level, or shall I continue? Shall I continue? Perfect. See, guys, we have a limited time. This is not a session, but a but what do you say? It's basically a workshop kind of thing. I would respect every one of you to either buck up, or you can record video at any point in time. I come up over here, I now have to create a controller which will be starting point of my app. So what I say that in this project, in this package, again, this is not a good thing. It should not have been capital. I just to explain it to you, I did it like this. Now I will give it a controller. I have created a controller one, and I say that it is a REST API test controller. Right, guys? And then once it's done, I say finish. Now, once this is there, I come up over here. I say that this is at the rate, this is a REST controller. Correct? It means that it will be, this annotation implies that this will be having my API endpoints, which will be triggered and will be taken down backward. So I have a controller which then calls a service, which then has a DAO layer or a data interaction layer. Correct, guys? Now over here, I create a function, let's say public, I give it a string, I say hello world. Now what I say return hello world. Now this function should have a should have some mapping to understand where this function listens on that side. So I say at the rate get mapping. Now, what does a get mapping means? It will be a get call. Now, all those who don't understand this, what it means that the type of this request will be get. I'll be showing you what other types can be. You can have post, you can have delete, you can have patch, and you can have a ton of these mappings, right? And I give it that this mapping is slash, correct, guys? Now, at this point in time, how do I start this project? I come to my let's start Spring Boot application, which determines that this is a Spring Boot application. It's basically a bootstrapper. It gives the target, it determines the Spring Boot configuration, that enables the automatic configuration, then says start looking for components or controllers in all the components over here, and based on this starts the work. I go over here, I say run this project, and once I run this, it will be starting a Tomcat server for me first, after a Spring Boot logo, and will be continuing from there. Guys, does it make sense? So you see now Tomcat started at Tomcat initialized with port 8080, and it says root application started, and it says the started the application in 20.48 second, which is over here. I go to my browser over here, and in my browser I simply go over here, I say localhost 8080. When I say 8080, see, it gave a Spring logo, but I don't have any listening thing over here. I say hello. Why hello? Because it is now listening to me on the hello. Correct, guys? Does it make sense? Now, how do I extend this function and how do I go a step forward in it? Now, to go a step forward in it is, I don't want it to be hello world. I want it to take a name and return the name it has taken. Correct, guys? All of you. Does it make sense? Okay. So for that, I will go to my REST API controller, or sorry, REST API test controller. I'll give another function. I'll say public. Now, I will give the function as the, in the exact same manner, in which it was. Only change I will be making is I will allow it to accept data from from the URL. Correct, guys? Does it make sense, everyone? Now, how do we do that? To do that, we have to simply say that this will be a request body. So I say this will give a string. I say hello. Now, why hello? Because this will be having a request body. Now, what is in the body? No, this is request panel. Sorry. Now, I can pass a body. I can now there are three things which I can pass. Now, a request mapping is a one which you pass, which tells like how you are mapping the request. Request param means you are passing a request param in your in a Spring Boot app. So, okay, guys, how many of you know what is a param? Now, what we do, I simply say that this is a request param. There are multiple things in which we can handle it. I'll say param, I say string, I say name. Now, in the name, I go over here and I give it a name as hello, and then I say name. Correct, guys? and I say return. Now, what will I return? I'll return hello. I'll give it a space. I'll then get the name from here. I'll then add a comma and I'll close it there. Does it make sense, guys? All of you. I close my project. I close my initial running instance. I close this and now I fire this once again. Okay, my project has now started up and it is running on the server. I go back to my Tomcat over here and I say hello. I pass name. Now, how you to pass on the param? Observe this carefully. I pass a question mark. I pass name equal to Aditya. Now, whatever name I pass over here will be shown you over here. Guys, does it make sense? All of you. Now, this is complex. I don't want it to be a name like this. This is a param, and these can be compromised. But typically, what other ways of interaction could be, I could have a I can give a variable in my path like this. I give it like this. I say name. Now it's not a request param. Now it's a path variable. It's a name. Everything remains same. Hello path. The behavior remains same. It's just a different way of using things. Now, why this is when will this make sense? Let's say you have a ID which is to be passed many a times on the URL. That's how you fetch that stuff, and that's how you load that and you show it in your application. So for this, I will go to my Chrome and I will not remove this because this app will or this URL is still available. I will come up over here. I'll remove this. I will pass Aditya over. If I pass Aditya like this, it will be like that. Guys, all of you, does that make sense? This is the easiest and the simplest way to get started with Spring Boot. Now, this is a good way, and let's say that I have to have a controller and my application will have multiple controllers. So now how do I determine now till now what if I'm using hello somewhere, or how do I give it a proper differentiation? So you see hello is over here also, hello is over here also, hello is over here also. So what I could even also do is I could say that the mapping for this one will be on hello. So what it means on hello, by default, it will whenever there is hello in the URL, it will come up over here onto this controller. And when there is a single slash, which means a hello and a slash, the flow will come over here. When there is a name, the flow will come over here. And when there is a name like this in the request param, the flow will come over here. Again, why we do this? Because I want my I want to ensure that I don't duplicate stuff. So how I develop, like I have an employee controller, so that will be an employee, and all other routes are held inside this controller where it is working. Guys, does it make sense? Anyone who is like not able to follow till now? Okay. I'll just turn around to the Chrome and I'll start reading a few of your questions if any one of you is having. Hmm, parameter for function. No, Karthik, the parameter, okay, Karthik, it's not about being a best practice. You have to understand. Uh, okay, yes, I'll tell you. Okay, let's say that, okay, I search for iPhone 14. When I search for iPhone 14, what do you get? And question mark something, something like this. Now, what do you do? Identify that when you have something, when you have a route coming, like if I go over here, right? Now, this is a, what is this? This is a request para. This is a path para or path variable. What is this? This is the name of the product. Correct, guys? Whereas the one which I'm seeing over here, this is request para. So why we use request para? To understand how my session is being handled or what session I'm using. So we use both of them interchangeably, to be very honest. Now, if I go to Amazon, what do you find? What is this? It is the ID of this phone which is being shown over here. Correct. Whereas if I search for something over here, iPhone 14, now it will be, let it open up. Now you see it shows as what are the field queries. What is the keyword I searched for? So this depends on different scenario, which path will I go forward with. So if my page is loading on depending on some condition, I would want it to be in the path always. Then I will go with the path variable. Request param are more or less an optional concept which might be there, which might not be there. Now when I click this, it shows what is the reference, how this URL came up, what were the keywords, and all that stuff. So this is an example of the request param. So you now know what is the path variable and what is the request path. Does it make sense, Karthik? Now, anyone who is not able to follow up this part. Okay. Now I will move ahead to the last part, which is a question from some of you. And the question is, what is dependency injection? I'm clearing this. Now, let's take an example. I'll go to the same example which I was discussing. I have a employee class. Now, a employee class can have ID, it can have name, and it can have a address. Now, an address in itself is a bean. So, what does address have? Address has a ID, it has a street, it has a city, a country, and a code. Now, when I say employee EMP is equal to, I typecast it to employee, I say context dot get being employee. When I'm getting this, now a question is what should happen of the address? How do I understand what to do of the address? That is where Spring got a very beautiful concept of injecting the dependency. So now in the Spring, what I will do, there are two ways to add dependency. The first way is known as a constructor-based dependency injection, and the second one is known as setter-based dependency injection. Correct, guys? So now, what are the problems with this dependency injection? A very obvious problem with the dependency injection is now my two objects are tightly coupled. In order to test employee, I need to have the address. Correct, guys? So now what I will do, I have two mechanisms. So what does my first mechanism look like? I will say that I will have a bean object, right? And I will say its ID is employee. I give it some class, which class is it? And then I start giving the constructor argument, correct? And in the constructor argument, I say constructor argument. Now, whenever there is a class coming, or whenever there is a something like uh, address, I can pass that the above bean of address, which was over here, can be injected into this one. So when I create the object of this bean, the address based on the above bean will be filled and will be available over here. Guys, does it make sense? All of you. Now, the next mechanism is a dependency injection by setter. That is fairly simple. So now in the ID, what I would say, I would give it that I have a property. The property name is ID and its value is, let's say, 30 or whatever is the value. Guys, does it make sense? All of you? Yes or no? So, guys, from the beginner's point of view, that was all from my side. Okay, Abhishek is having a topic. Okay, first, anyone is having any topics from what we have discussed till now? Abhishek, I'll take your question towards the end. It's a bit ahead of the time. I will be covering it with AOP just in 2 minutes. Guys, anyone having any questions for me? Okay. If no questions, there were two questions which I would like to answer right now. What was the question? Someone asked, what is AOP? Now, sometimes in my application programming, I have different aspects. Let's say that when I'm developing a Spring app, one of my aspect of this Spring is a logger, or how do I log stuff. So what I do, I create a logger as a separate aspect and I use it in whichever place I want to. Now, logger is an individual entity in itself. It's separate from my project, but it is an aspect which is built on separately. Does that make sense? This is what you typically mean by AOP. Now, one thing which is a very important concept is uh, how how do I ensure my application runs correctly? So for that, what we have is we have loggers. Now, typically, when you do a sysout, most of us are very bad at it. We do random sysouts in our code, which is not a good way. Why? Because by adding random sysouts, these are all printed on the console, which is not the idle mechanism. Typically, in the interest of the app, what we do, we should either have a debug either a debug message or a error message or a warning, and we can store them separately in different log files, right? Now this is one part. The What is the first part? The first part is how do we handle different kind of messages on the log. Next part is I generate a log file which is 500 gigs in size. Now to load this file will be so difficult. So what to do? We have to implement a kind of log file rotation. So now, as an application developer, it is not easy for us to do everything. So what we do? We either go and we implement we pull something which is already implementing it. So like we have log4j, which we can use. So logger is a library in which we configure these stuff and it can use it very easily and in a very flexible manner. Now, when you have a project like this, so your backend app is one, your logger is another. Now, logger has to focus on a different part. Your app has to focus on different path. In such cases, you can say them like they have different concerns. They are basically cross-cutting concerns. So when I separate these concerns, that is what I call as AOP. Does it make sense? So what is the benefit? You can test your logger individually and your app individually, and in production you can merge them and you can test them. Abhishek, I hope your question is answered now. Anyone having any further doubts? Okay. If no further questions, guys, what next can be? Yes, we were talking around what are the different types of request handlers which are there. In order to see that, we have get, we have post, we have put, and typically for testing any API, it is good that you should use Postman, which is a more reliable or a more good application for testing the APIs, right? And it supports testing of all the different request methods that we have, irrespective of get, post, and all those things. Mm. Basically, inversion of control is, the idea is in IOC that we have to, we have to reduce down the complexity. Now, you know that the dependencies which are there and the components which we have, you can say that IOC and DA are interlinked. You can take it from that angle. It will be a bit difficult for me to explain on this in limited time what IOC is all about. But yes, the idea is, whatever you are having, like having different objects, different themes, and then we inject them into one. So you can relate the DI with the IOC basically. Now, one example on the IOC is the application context which you have. That's an IOC because it that control that container controls all your beans. That's a IOC based example. Guys, any further questions anyone is having for me? So we work with whatever dependency is given to us. Uh no. I'm not clear. Wait. So what he's saying is, so we work with whatever dependency is given to us rather than Karthik. Which dependency you are saying? You are asking about the no, Abhishek, you can add more dependencies over here. Now, wait, first of all, guys, are you asking about the dependency from the POM angle or from the dependency injection angle? That's my first question, right? Now, next is if you're asking from the Maven angle, you can go over here and add as many dependencies as you can. So the project that you got was just a bootstrap or a starter project. That's not the end of it. No, IOC is a Spring concept. This is Spring Boot. Karthik, this is Spring Boot. So what is IOC? So so this is don't mix the two dependencies. This dependency is the package or the project dependency. The dependency which I was showing you is in my Spring. Let's say that give me a second, guys. available over here. Oh, sorry, this is the DI project I want. Yes. Now take this example. Now I have an employee. Employee has an address, right? Now what should happen of this address? So what will happen of this address in the Spring config? In the Spring config, I will determine that this is my address bean. And based on whatever bean is it a singleton, is it repetitive? I am injecting it into my employer bean using reference. This is a dependency injection. Does that make sense? And if you observe, if you read the Spring documentation, even Spring says that IOC is also known as DI. So like these terms can be used interchangeably. This is basically inversion of control. Now this address can be controlled via the employee. You have to understand it like that. Does it make sense now, Karthik? Perfect days. Okay, that's good, guys. That's good. Now, anyone having any further questions? If no further questions, is it good? Okay. Now, I will be honest with you, considering the time we are in, I feel that yes, it's a good time that that you can master Spring. The benefit of Spring are really good, like it has been there for almost, I would say, 2 decades now. The first time Spring came in was in 2004, and it's still running good. So I would say it's a good time. And but if you want to learn Spring, make sure you know Java first. And like even at Geeks for Geeks, there's the JBDL course which you can refer. It has some really good, some good references to, to get started with Spring. In that, so I am one of the mentor for that course. In that course, we cover two main projects. We talk around the starting with Java, using Spring Boot or using Spring with Spring Data, using JPA, Hibern, and JDBC. So it touches all the balloons, or all the pies in the bucket to ensure that you have a good exposure to the overall structure. Any further questions anyone is having for me? Now, if no further questions, I would like to thank you all for your time coming out on a Saturday evening or morning, depending on which part of the world you are in, and attending session. And it's good that Geeks or Geeks can be a part in your journey to be a good developer. And I wish you all the best for your career. Stay motivated, keep on learning. That's how this industry is bloom is bound to grow. So wishing you all the best for your careers, everyone. And any questions, you can post them freely on Geeks for Geeks. We'll try to answer that. And see you on the other side. Take care and have a very good day ahead.